Hello beautiful people and welcome to another video. In this one I'll be working on something that I believe used to be a vanity and someone failed in trying to make two bedside tables out of it. This rotten piece of plywood that I'm taking off, someone used to cover the original side, and I think they did it just because there's some holes and the groove from some sort of tabletop that used to connect these two pieces, and this is the other side that someone just filled in with I don't know what. I counted 4 different colors of paint on these. So this is actually the original side of this vanity, because I'm guessing this was vanity, and as you can see there is a groove for some sort of tabletop and someone covered it with a piece of plywood. And there are holes from the screws that would connect all those pieces together. And it looked like this piece of trim was not original either. And Mando seemed very confused with all the colors of paint that someone put on those bedside tables. The veneer on this top is completely destroyed because the person who started working on this sanded through it. There's also some woodworm damage and lots of little pieces missing everywhere, so trying to repair this is just not reasonable, and I'll need to cover this with a new piece. If it was some sort of fancy veneer, maybe I would have tried to restore it, but this was just oak and it wasn't an antique. This is the piece that I've just removed from here, and it looks like it's just the perfect size. This doesn't need to be perfect, I'm basically just making sure there's some sort of substrate for the veneer. This was the right width but not thick enough, so I had to cut another piece of plywood just to make sure it was all flush. Throughout this video I'll use several different methods of attaching pieces. In this case I'm using regular wood glue, some super glue and activator just to keep it in place, and also some rod nails. Here I'm just making sure they're not sticking out because I'm applying veneer on top of this, so I don't want any bumps. There's some woodworm damage, so I'm going to treat it with this spray. I think this woodworm damage wasn't active, but I sprayed everything just to be on the safe side. And now time for my favorite part. There was a lot of paint and a lot of loose pieces of veneer that I had to remove to make sure I had a solid substrate for the new veneer. As I mentioned, there was some woodworm damage and some holes on the side, so this was probably not necessary because they were not big, so the veneer would easily cover all of them, but why not? There was a small piece of wood missing in the corner, and I'm going to cover this with veneer eventually, so I could have used wood filler or epoxy putty or something else, but why not? I just use a piece of wood. And in this case I'm using super glue and activator to hold the piece in place until the regular wood glue dries, so I don't need to clamp it. Just a bit of sanding and Bob's your uncle. There were some nails sticking out, so I had to push them in so I could actually sand this. If you remember, I also used some wood filler on the side, so when it was dry I sanded it. And then I did some sanding by hand because I really like sanding.
A few moments later.
As you can see, the base was kind of curved, so it wasn't very easy to sand, so I used this nylon brush that I just put in my drill, and that made it much easier to remove most of the paint. Well, that took a while. When I was finally done with that, I removed all the drawer stoppers, but first I measured how far in they were so I wouldn't have to worry about it later on. And this way I could sand all the stretchers and also have the measurements saved on my little speed square tool thingy, so then I could just use it to put them back in. Well, I'm not actually gonna put them back in because I destroyed them, so I'm gonna make new ones. As I was doing that, I noticed there was a small crack, so I put in some glue, clamped it and left it to dry. I also did some sanding on the inside, the bottom and everywhere else because I'm a professional. So it looks like these poor bedside tables have been through a lot. Looks like both of them were orange at one point, and this one is also white and light blue and darker blue and I think medium blue. And there's a lot of wood filler or something that they used to fill in the groove and the holes. Yeah, I don't know what they were going for, but I don't think it worked. Anyhow, I used this rotary drum thingy to sand this curved surface because it was a bit tricky, and then I removed all the bottoms so I could actually clean the drawers on the inside and the bottoms as well. Once I removed all the drawer bottoms, I asked Rod to do some sanding on the inside while I was doing something else. There were quite a few bits that needed regluing, for example one of the joints on the drawers, so I did that. I thought maybe Mando was enjoying my company, but then I realized that he probably enjoyed the smell of the hide glue. Who knows, maybe I'll be able to teach him something and one day he'll be actually useful around the shop. For now, he just meows a lot and he's stinking cute, and that's okay. When I was done with that, I used oxalic acid because there were some stains on the insides of the drawers, so this is usually my first thing that I try, and if this doesn't work, I try hydrogen peroxide or other things, such as acetone. There are a bunch of stains inside of this drawer and I don't know what these are. I'm just trying oxalic acid, but this is probably ink stain and oxalic acid is not going to help with this, so I'm going to use some acetone. And you probably can't see it because you can see the large stain, which is probably oil, but there was a small pinkish stain and that was probably ink. I cut a bunch of plugs because there were lots of holes in the drawer fronts, don't know why, but they needed to be plugged, so that's what I did. After plugging all the holes, I used oxalic acid on the bases of these bedside tables, and then I did some sanding. And there was a lot of sanding, so I took advantage of the time and did some things that I don't normally get to do. Like checking my emails, folding microfiber cloths, or doing flower arrangements.
2,000 years later.
As I mentioned, there were lots of bits that needed regluing, so I did that. And because there was a lot of paint in this curved area, so I just used paint stripper because I did not want to deal with that. I mean, I still had to deal with it, but it was a bit easier than just sanding it. this paint did not want to come off without a fight, so after scraping most of it off, I used some steel wool and white spirit, and then I used a nylon brush to remove the rest of it. Well, this is actually wire brush, I forgot about this one. And yes, on oak, if you do it the same direction as the grain, it's not a big deal, you can use it. You just need to sand it afterwards.
A few moments later.
When the oxalic acid was dry, I rinsed everything with water, let it dry, and I was able to put all the bottoms back in. Obviously I'm using brass nails because, as you know by now, I'm fancy AF. One of these top drawers has slots for dividers, but the other one doesn't. So I think I'll just need to make them.
Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise.
Don't you like surprises? In order to make those dividers, I just took a piece of plywood and I applied veneer on both sides so they would match the rest of the bedside tables. I used a pointy bit on my calipers to measure the depth of those slots so I could actually transfer it onto the piece of plywood and cut it to size. More or less, because I would need to cut off a bit so the drawer bottom will actually fit. You'll see what I mean. I'm also using this flexible metal ruler to draw a curved line so I can actually mimic the profile of the drawers because these dividers are not the same height on both sides, as you can see. Once I was done with the first one, I just copied the shape onto a piece of plywood and I cut another one. And then I used some super glue, an activator and 2 pieces of tape to glue them together temporarily so I could actually clean up the edges and make them exactly the same. And to do that I used a rotary drum sanding thingy that I used to clean the curved side on the bedside table before. And that made it much easier. But obviously this is made from plywood, so even though I covered both sides, the edges are exposed, so I need to put on some veneer to make them look pretty. And to make it easy, I'm just using this edge banding tape thingy. It's got adhesive on it, you just melt it with an iron and it sticks to whatever surface you want to put it on. Super easy. You cut off the excess veneer, do a little bit of sanding, and Bob's your uncle. And I know that lots of you have said that Bob is not actually your uncle, but trust me, he is. And this is what I was talking about. I need to cut off a bit on the bottom so I can actually slide in the drawer bottom, if it makes sense. And I was definitely fully aware of that the first time I cut them. Oh, and look how pretty they are. I'm definitely a professional. These joints needed some glue as well, and this was not an ideal way to do it, but I couldn't take it apart, so I inserted as much as I could with a syringe, clamped it together, and it worked. I taped off the bases and the fronts so I wouldn't get any adhesive on them. When I was done with that, I used spray contact adhesive, which is my new favorite way of attaching veneer. It's super easy, it's super quick, and it gives you nice even coverage. I only had one of these sheets of veneer, so I made sure that I measured it right. And this is probably the trickiest part of this whole process because, as you can see, the shape of these bedside tables is not very straightforward and there are some curves, and I wanted to have the waterfall effect, so basically continuous grain on the entire outside surface, and that was not easy, and I'll show you how I did it. This contact adhesive, I get it from B&Q, which is like Home Depot here in the UK, and it works great. You need to wait about 10 minutes until it's kind of dry, and then you can apply the veneer. And this is the tricky part. As you can see, I basically attached it on the top, and then I slowly try to go down this curve. And for the 90-degree angle, I basically made a score line underneath so it would break evenly, and this is just how I did it. I don't know if this is the best way of doing it, but it worked well. And I did exactly the same thing on the opposite side. I basically made sure I went as close to the edge of the bedside table as possible so I wouldn't have a gap. And the reason you can hear this breaking is because of the score line underneath. When I was finally done with that, I cut off all the excess veneer and did a little bit of sanding and making sure that all the seams are as perfect as they can be. At this point there is still a few bubbles, but I will actually go over this entire thing later on and make sure that everything is adhered properly. I'm mixing some wood filler with a little bit of pigment to make it grayish black, because I want to make these joints perfect. And they actually were pretty close to perfect, but you know, I'm a professional. I use my finger to press it into the little crack between those two pieces of veneer to make it seamless. So I've got a bit of a problem. I've just finished putting the veneer on. It's looking really nice. I've got the waterfall effect. It's all continuous grain, but this is the original drawer front and I don't love it. As you can see, the grain pattern on this is completely different from this and I don't really like it. I'll just cover it so it matches the rest of this bedside table. I don't really care for the edges because they just don't look very nice, and I just don't like the way they look with this grain. So I think I'm gonna put veneer on this as well, just to make it all look exactly the same, if it makes sense. So this is what I did, and this is the easiest way of doing flat surfaces. I used the offcut of the veneer that I was using before and basically just put down the drawer on a flat surface, cut off the excess, and that's it. I repeated exactly the same process for the other drawers and it literally took me like, I don't know, 20 minutes. And when I was done with that, if you remember, I destroyed all the drawer stoppers, so I had to make new ones. And to make it easy for myself, I just used my laser because I have one. So I just picked a shape that was as close to the original drawer stoppers as possible, made multiple of them, made sure that I had the right size, and I just cut them out. And if you recall from the beginning of the video, I use my speed square thingy to have the exact depth that I needed saved on the tool, because there's a little screw that you can tighten so it doesn't move, and I knew exactly where to place them. I used some super glue and activator to make sure they would stick right on, and then I just put some nails through to make sure they wouldn't move. And then I cut some strips of edge bending and I applied them onto the front of the bedside tables so the grain pattern would match the outside and the drawer fronts. And for this curve, I basically used a really wide piece of edge bending so it would cover the whole thing, and then just trimmed the excess, and that was actually pretty easy. And I made sure that those pieces were joined at the same angle that they were joined at originally, so they would look nice. Basically, so they follow the shape of the bedside table. I used my trim router to clean up all the edges, did some sanding, and it was pretty much done. As always, I wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone for watching my videos, commenting, liking. That really helps a lot and it allows me to do what I do. And as always, special shout out to all the channel members. You guys are the best. If you enjoy my videos and would like to support me and the channel, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee. You can visit my Amazon wishlist link, or you can hit the super thanks button. All the links are in the description. Thank you. I did some final sanding and checked for any scratches with a bright light, and I also used this foam adapter thing on my sander so I could actually sand the curved bit. When I was done with that, I used sanding sealer and I sprayed everything because it makes applying a finish or a stain super smooth and super easy. This also helps to prevent any unevenness when it comes to staining, so if you don't have much experience, this is definitely something you should look into. Sometimes when I work on a project, I know from the very beginning what color I want to go with, but for whatever reason with this one, I just didn't know. I actually tested multiple colors on a piece of veneer, hoping that that would give me an idea, and I really couldn't make up my mind. I wonder if you can guess which one I went with. If you're not new to my channel, you probably know that I rarely do just one color. So in this case I wanted to do more than one as well. If you've seen my previous videos, I used this green color on one other project and I really liked it, so I decided to give it another chance but make it a bit different. As I mentioned, I use acrylic sanding sealer, but I also wanted to make sure that there was no blotches whatsoever, so I decided to apply it with a spray gun, and this way it would be nice and even. I do like this green, but this is not what I'm going for, so I'm going to apply some oil that's got pigment in it to make it darker and richer. So if you've ever worked with oak, you know that it's got a very specific type of grain and there is lots of little gaps or spaces between the grains, which allows for any pigment to settle into those, which basically just gives you more visual interest and doesn't make it just one-dimensional, if it makes sense. And this is the type of look that I'm trying to achieve here. So I want the drawer fronts and the bases of the bedside tables to look very similar, and this is the right direction but definitely not the color that I need, so I'm going to work on it a bit later. So now you can actually see what I was talking about. Because of the pigment in the oil which settles in the gaps between wood grains, it enhances the look of the grain and makes it pop, and also the color is nice and rich and dark. I did 2 coats of that oil on the outside, and actually the second coat, which you'll see in a bit, had a different pigment in it until I was happy with the overall look. It's kind of okay as it is, but I think I'm gonna try and make the drawer fronts a bit more brown so they look more like the bases. I also couldn't decide on the hardware for these bedside tables, but I had those glass and brass knobs that one of you sent me, so decided to go with these, but because they are attached with just one screw, I can easily change them if I decide to do it later. I do like it better, so I think this is the way to go. I'm also going to add a bit of oil with some black pigment to the top because I want it to be a bit darker. It's gonna make the green color a bit richer and I think it will look much better against brown. I also decided to keep the insides of the drawers just natural wood and give the person who's going to buy them a choice whether they want to wax them or not. One of you sent me these knobs in the post and I don't know who it was, but thank you. And I'm gonna use them for this project because they're really nice. I hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next one.